Chronicles of Picklestan, a Twitter story. As a warning, this is something much less serious than my other stuff. This is based on a meme war from Twitter amongst people in the community I stream with that I turned into a dark fantasy story because why the hell not? And I hope you enjoy. This is brought to us courtesy of Samuel the Infamous, by Shadow of Hawk 551, narrated by Caucasian Sasquatch. Like, comment, and subscribe. Forget dreams and wonder, for both are dead. The darkness that chokes the world has killed dreams and wonder. This is a world of spite, war, and hate. There are no heroes, only villains who are less vile than others. These are the Picklestan Chronicles. The Pickles of Picklestan have always been a peaceful people, growing their young as cucumbers and then brining them in the salty waters of the Barrier Sea into pickles. They grow a variety of foods and trade them with foreigners, all ilks, as well as maintain the land-based trade routes that pass between the eastern and western continent. As major powers began to rise and fall, the Pickles found themselves under attack. Seaborne raiders from the anti-libertarian Marines, swamp-living witches, and heathens coming up from the south, and savage blonde-haired men with fur pelts and cowhide shields coming up from the lowlands to their southeast. They sought protection. They found it in the form of the Baktaco Kingdom. The Pickles, having no real theology before this, began to praise the king of Baktaco Kingdom, Dermy Wormy, as their defender and savior. They would offer up choice members of their civilization as a gift to the Baktaco and erected great pyramids in his honor, their memory and praise, their protector. Eventually, the Baktaco Kingdom, through hook or crook, pacified the tribes of Shock to its south, the lands of Adam to its north, and in some dark and unknowable pact, aligned the game land of Anna to its banner. This growing threat brought fears to the city-state of Hadouken, a growing industrial power in the region that made use of steel and steam to exert its will on otherwise tribal savages within its bounds. Its leader, Paul of the House Hadouken, sought out allies. He found them in the green-haired leader of the anti-liberal Marines, Tiff, and the many times cursed dirty T-Rex fucker Ryan. Through Ryan, he secured an alliance with the swamps, as for some unknown reason, the infamous deity of the swamps, Samuel, was the hetero life partner of the T-Rex fucker. Battle was had in the kingdom of the potatoes, when the great king of those peoples, Fractured Filter, was driven from his capital by the armies of Picklehontas, or, as she was known to her enemies, the dreaded Melee K. On the fields of Tuber, Fractured Filter joined the Power Couch Nation, a union of disparate factions against the dreaded foe of the Baktaco Kingdom. And the following day, the armies of Dermy marched into view. Steam-belching tanks with steel hides were surrounded by potatoes that were furious at being driven from their homes. The flanks were guarded by T-Rex riding savages whose leader, Rex Ryan, led from the front. Interspersed behind the line were druids, cultists, and witches of Samuel, guarded by their throngs of savage heathens covered in vines and snakeskins, all wielding long knives or bare fists for battle. These dark-hearted savages were commanded by the demon Kohai Masochist and the dread knight Larry, two of the most loyal retainers of the infamous, who had yet to take the field. On the opposing side were the armies of the Baktaco Kingdom. The flanks were held by the kangaroo-riding Drusina of Gameland, their queen Anna standing upon her war chariot drawn by Herculean-sized snow leopards. Beside the flanks forming the bull horns their people were so known for were the tribes of Shak, men with skin only slightly less white than those of the game land, with hair blonde like gold and armor and shields of thick animal hides from the beasts they hunt and butchered in the lowlands of Shak. Their preferred weapon, barbed spears for bringing down the great beasts of the lowlands, were forged with gameland steel, a sign of the loyalty between the two nations. And for a reason unknown to the king of the back tacos, the warriors of Shak would stink of the mint leaf. The core of the army were the oppressed peoples that had been broken under the back taco. Tribesmen who only knew how to work iron and bronze. Adams, a race of identical-looking men that reproduced by sporing, who refused to bow to Dermy, were thrown either to the back taco or to the war effort. The Adams were as endless as their suffering. And most numerous were the Pickles, a people who had no knowledge of warfare, yet made grand fodder for their numbers. Those that were war slaves were ones that had spoken against the back taco, and they were to be used as arrow fodder by Pocahontas in the name of the back taco. The corps around the back taco king Dermy were dressed in lamellar armor of a variety of colors, with great two-handed curved blades, or arquebuses of a far northern make, at the ready. Voodoo helms and demon masks hid their faces as banners strapped to their backs bearing their clan's crest billowed in the winds. And at the center of it all, raised upon a foul and gross temple throne, was the back taco king himself, Dermy Wormy. His foulness unrivaled, his obesity unequaled. The wails of 1,000 victims cried out from his back taco as he stared evilly upon the war that was to be had in his name. The field held its breath. A light dew coating the ground as two hosts stared each other down. The T-Rexes were the first to break the silence, the stink of ruse in their nostrils. They roared, and with their call, the Rangers of Requiem roared with their beasts. Rushing forward like great predators, they fought alongside in pawn. The Ruish Drusina feigned a withdrawal towards the horns of Shak, but the Rex of Requiem knew this was a trap, for he had seen the warriors of Shak lay low great beasts in his traveling days. He clicked his heels into the flank of his mount, Rexy, and she roared to her fellow Rexes, who obeyed and backed away from the trap. The tribesmen of Shak, seeing this withdrawal as a sign of weakness in their beasts, broke ranks and surged forward, bellowing and screaming. Their warlord, Shaka Zulu, could not rein them in, instead bidding for his close friend Anna to join him in the charge. Half of Dermy's army was surging towards the lines of the power couch. The tanks of the Hadoken were the first to spill blood that day. A staccato of machine gun fire sounded out against the screams of the Shak and tore into the maddened hordes by the dozens. Cannons meant to break through stone walls fired as mortars at the rude Drusinos, sending the bodies of Man, Rue, and Joey into the air as a bloody mess. Then the magics of the swamps came into range. Benedictions to Samuel or prayers to the spirits of the earth and sky were sung and screamed. Eldritch lightnings fell from the outer dark as the very ground rose against the charging clans. Kohai was about to unleash her dread power when the head of a druid near her exploded and thunder sounded from the east. Gameland sharpshooters, guided by Pickles, who had spent many seasons in the Potato Kingdom as farmers and traders, had set themselves up in the perfect place to target the Mage Corps. The magic was ceased as the denizens of the swamps fled behind and beside the tanks for cover. The Rexes upon the right flank, bitten by bullets that hurt like gnats to the great beasts, but were lethal for their riders and rangers, charged at the sharpshooters and were pulled out of position. The Rexes on the left flank, led by Rex Ryan, charged forward into the suppressed hordes of the shock, confident that the beast hunters could be broken by his army of beasts. But amongst the grasses, Picklehuntus's partisans of premier pickle pathfinders were waiting with rope and wire. They charged unseen until it was too late at the legs and the feet of the Rexes and the men that ran alongside them, tripping them, tumbling them, felling them. And then the shock entered javelin range. Barbed spears flew screaming into the air. The scent of copper joined that of mint as the metal tips bit deep into the flesh of man and grounded avian. Rex Ryan upon Rexy was not deterred nor perturbed by the ambush and the failed charge. His long sword swung violently from the back of Rexy, him hanging only by bungee rope as he swung from her back at the foe, hacking warriors of shock as she fed upon the blood and brine of their foe. On the right flank, without the Rexes to provide support, the snakeskin-wearing heathens of Samuel were overridden by Rue-riding Drusina, whose beast kicked them back into their allies, only to be speared by the lances of Drusina upon their back. And the shocks joined as vigorously. Javelins flew through the air into the effectively unarmored heathens. But these were not sane men who would fall into a gibbering wreck from such a lethal attack. They were madmen of the swamps, those who had seen the face of Samuel in their dreams. They were mad, pain held no form over them. They countercharged into the shock tribes, without any fear of death, for their minds were broken. Shaka Zulu joined proper with his elites, surprised at the countercharge against the forces of his and his friends' mighty army. Anna herself committed her chariot and leopards, trampling the heathens as her cats played with them, their claws and twisted minds being the only thing to elicit screams from the maddened cultists. With the enemy too close, the tanks could not fire their main cannons, and they lost precious seconds as they quietened their guns whilst debating whether or not to fire into the backs of their allies to kill the attackers. The Knight Larry took the initiative, charging into the battle flanked by screaming reserves of zealot dark paladins, and angry potatoes bolstering the forces of the heathens who had effectively stabilized the line against the shock warriors, and driven off the Drusina completely. As Anna commanded her forces to pull away, their advantage of momentum lost, to reorganize for a second charge. Within the command bunker, President General Paul of the Great and Glorious House Hadouken watched the battlefield shift and move on his battle map, his aides and spotters moving pieces to represent up-to-date information. Comms using simplistic line-of-sight radios were seen as the radio operators coordinated the crews of the tanks. Many were running low on ammunition and would need to cycle out to resupply, but doing so would leave many magic users exposed. Reports of how the T-Rexes and their supporting warriors on the left flank were nearly gone. The enslaved masses of the Back Taco Kingdom were driven forward with whips by Yaris and Noticus' demon-masked taskmasters. Despite the woe for the power couch, there was enough room for Rex Ryan to rally his T-Rex riders and his rangers into something of a formation. Withdrawing at this juncture would expose their flanks and rear. They were not disciplined enough to back away controlled, so he committed to facing down the slave army. Arquebuses shrieked from the lines of Back Taco. As Rexy ran forward, her skull strong enough to shatter the tallest and oldest of redwoods to splinters, soaking up lead that intended to dig into her flesh and lay her low. Ryan was protected by her skull, and when they arrived at the enemy line, he swung along her side and began swinging his blade against the slave soldiers that surrounded him. Rexy dined upon the flesh, bronze and iron breaking upon her hide, brine and blood staining her teeth and clawed feet. Rangers of the Requiem joined the fray in Rex's too. Even with the whipping and prodding by their masters, the slaves could not find the courage to charge forward with the jaws of such a foe. First one, then two, then 10, then 30, then 100, then 200, and soon the entire force broke. They threw down their demon-masked masters and trampled them to death, charging away. But this act saved the life of the Back Taco King, for the T-Rexes were hungry and enraged. The screaming, crying men in pickles were more appealing to run down than to fight the demon-faced men with thunder sticks and gleaming claws. That left Rex Ryan, his Rexy, who was the only one to rein in her bloodlust enough to stand with her rider, and a band of warriors out of position and outnumbered, being surrounded by the practitioners of Back Takoshido, the reformed shock warriors, and Melee K's Picklehuntus' partisans of premier pickle pathfinders. Upon the extreme right flank, the Gameland sharpshooters executed a withdrawal that led the Rexes and riders and rangers into a gully where a group of shock charged out with javelins and boar spears, and Rue riders led by Anna charged into the exposed, unsupported flanks of Requiem's force. Half of the Requiem's contingent died out of sight of the Power Couch Nation, who were horrified to see the host of fresh shocks charging over the hills with songs of gunfire ringing out as officers and mages died. Hadouken ordered his tanks around the command bunker and ordered his reserves to take defensive positions. Machine guns, weapons of incredible value, were placed alongside crossbowmen and slingers within a line of trenches as the tanks withdrew, abandoning the front line. The heathens, uncaring and mad, fought on despite the impossible odds. The cultists and the witches threw caution to the wind and cried out for darker desires. Invisible forces tore through the warriors of shock. Men melted into mush, only to form into unspeakable writhing horrors with many limbs and eyes that popped like grenades only moments after being born, showering the men with viscera and bone shrapnel. Unlike the heathens, they feared death. Soon, the denizens of the swamps withdrew to the line of Hadouken, the ones not maddened by seeing their god's face. Those had died horrifically and brutally, but they watered the ground red. The potatoes fought to the last alongside the madmen, only withdrawing to drag their king away, who fought on despite his grievous wounds. The armies of the Power Couch had been segmented and torn apart, and as they readied for their final deaths, separated and alone, Dermy stood tall, his impossible bulk thundering against the base of his throne as he spoke. He offered mercy, so long as the leaders of this foolish opposition submitted to the Back Taco. 1,000,000 voices cried out not to take the offer, to fight and resist and not believe his lies. He silenced them in an act too horrific to describe. But it was this act, this attempt at silencing the truth, that bid the Rex of Requiem to cry out, "Fuck you, Dermy, you fat fuck!" And he and Rexy and his riders and his rangers resisted the foe, fighting as though hell itself was at their backs. They fought the shock and the warriors of Back Takoshido and the partisans of Picklehuntus. Then the skies boiled and blackened, and the air lost its sweetness. A horrific, indescribable horror descended from above, a body of endless tendrils gathering around a hooded face, a face hidden in blackness. Upon the hood was a beanie with a middle finger sewn on, the symbol of the infamous. And he spake, his voice not corporal, but appearing in the mind of every living thing upon the battlefield.
Save. Full screen.
Well, I say every day it's a getting closer to taking a bath with my fucking toaster.
Greetings, welcome, and salutations to the, and I just jacked that all up, but you'll have to forgive me. 76th episode of Screaming Into the Void, where we talk about whatever the hell we feel like. My apologies for the lateness, folks. That was on me. I only recently got the link set up because I slept all day and almost didn't wake up in time for this, so here we are. But joining me today, we have Ryan.
Hi, I'm Ryan. I'm the Dirty Rex fucker, and I'm streaming from my phone. And from Gal's face, I sound super gay.
Okay.
To the enemies of the power couch, a horde of horrific and impossible shrieks sounded from the void. Not in their minds. A real sound, one that shook the world and could be heard as far away as Picklestan. But it left the power couch unharmed, and they responded violently. The Requiem broke free and withdrew. The heathens of Samuel rose from their wounds and fought on with their God in sight, and the Hadouken Tank Corps, rearmed, rejoined the fighting, and battered and broke the Shock and Gamelin Dracena. Dermy looked upon his shattered army, and fled before the sight of his defeat. But he knew if he returned home, he could raise a new army, a greater army. He would break the power couch beneath his back taco. Then he saw it, a forest of masts upon the sea. The green-haired anti-liberal had led her fleet of marines and sailors against the capital of the Potato Kingdom. His reserves had been surprised and destroyed. The anti-liberals had established a carronade upon its walls of the fortress city and garrisoned it with fresh fighters. The Back Taco King knew he had been bested, and so he called for a truce. He was to return to the east and never cross over into the west. He was to relinquish his authority of his vassals and allow any of the people who sought freedom their freedom. The Adams and many other tribes cried tears of joy at this. Picklestan was split in two to allow a buffer state, as the Pickles themselves were still loyal to Dermy. The western half became Picklecrane, an unofficial member of the Power Couch Nation and a protectorate of the Potato Kingdom. The city of Weeb was given over to the anti-liberal Marines, severing the trade of weapons and armor from the Weebish River to the peoples of the Back Taco. It was a horrific and humiliating defeat for the Back Taco, but it was not the end. For whilst Dermy was battered, he was not broken, and a million voices still cried out from within the Back Taco as he plotted his next return.